It's Wrestle Maniac, brother. It's the CoCo Show, episode 28. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CoCo Show. I'm John.
And I'm Aaron, brother.
You know, I was going to try and do that in my wrestling voice.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I could keep it going long enough. I'm only good for about 3
We
or
should
4
do the whole
words
show like that. Every show. Not just this one. The Hulkster knows how to talk.
What is the second most recognizable wrestling voice aside from the Hulkster? The Hulkster and Macho Man kind of sound exactly the same.
No, they don't. Hulk's like, let me tell you something, brother. And Macho's like, ooh, yeah, ticket. That's what he does. That's how he does
Which one
it.
stamps into a Slim Jim?
That was Macho. Yeah, he ate the Slim Jims. Yeah.
Yeah. Aaron, is there a bigger fan of professional wrestling than you?
Oh yeah, there is now. But is there a longer tenured one? Probably not so much. I've been a fan for a long time.
I think that you're sort of well known, at least among our group of friends, as being the most learned man in the profession.
Well, Rushi knows his fair share. I'll give the devil his due. So, I mean, he knows more about the Japanese side of stuff and the women. But yeah, I've been around for a while. I've seen a lot, Bode.
It's funny we do all these shows, but the amount of wrestling games that we've covered is staggeringly small.
Yeah,
I mean,
and they're all horrible. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I have noticed that. Popeye Wrestling comes to mind.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember your first encounter with professional wrestling?
Yes, I do. I remember my first encounter with professional wrestling. I was a young lad, and I'm talking, this would have been before I was in grade school. My mom worked, my dad worked, and so they had a babysitter for me, Bob and Jackie, this old couple. They lived up at Nitro Boat, which is about 20 miles from here. Not that far, 15 miles. And when I would be there, on Saturday evenings, they would turn on Georgia Championship Wrestling, and it would be on. And I remember it, and I was bored stupid at their house. They're an old couple. There's nothing for me to do. And so this wrestling would come on, and it was like a gift from the gods. You'd see Tommy Wildfire Rich, Mr. Wrestling 2, the Masked Superstar, Ole Anderson. All these guys would come on the screen, and I was just like, man, what is this? And I really got into it back then. But as I got older, I sort of got out of it when I stopped going over there to be babysat and started school. And then my buddy Hose was a big wrestling fan. He never got over it, man. And about 1985, he started really bugging me to do, about wrestling. And so I started getting back into it. And that would have been during the TBS days of the 605 wrestling, NWA wrestling, World Championship Wrestling. And which is the exact same show I'd been watching the Babysitters, just a few years later, and with a different set of commentators. But yeah, it was great, and I've been into it ever since, for better or for worse. It's a time sink. It literally makes you your IQ drop the more you watch it. But it's just one of those things that happens.
Well, it's funny because we were talking a little bit before the show, and you said that Wrestle Maniac kind of resembles the wrestling of the 60s and the 70s. So if you were going to just sum up, wrestling by decade in a few words, what would you categorize the wrestling of the 60s as?
Well, really, wrestling I would say from the late 70s back was sort of a traditional art where guys pretended to actually fight. I mean, their goal was to make it look fairly realistic and to trick you into thinking that it was real. That was what they did.
Right.
And when the 80s rolled around, and don't get me wrong, a lot of people had figured it out by then,
Mm-hmm.
But as the 80s wore on, it got more and more goofy or less realistic. And then once the WWF started with Vince at the helm, they completely abandoned any sort of illusion that it was real. In fact, ultimately, Vince came forth and said it wasn't real, so he didn't have to keep paying the athletic commissions and stuff, all these extra insurances and taxes because they were still paying for it like it was a sporting event. And so when that happened, the cat was out of the bag. But by that time, you'd seen, and really, even in the 70s and 80s and 60s, there was a lot of goofy stuff going on. You had wrestling mummies. You know, I mean, that's hard to suspend your disbelief for that. You know, stuff like that. And by the '80s, you had Aliens, and you had all kinds of goofy stuff. So
just flat out most ridiculous wrestling gimmick you've ever seen.
Well, I mean, the Mummy's right up there. The Yeti is another one that comes to mind. Who was like, he was a Yeti, called the Yeti. He looked like a big mummy. There were these.
Wait a minute. The Yeti looked like a mummy?
Yeah, they called him the Yeti, but he looked like a big mummy. The Ding Dongs come to mind. There were these two guys that stood and they were tag team they were from Bellevue. And they wore full body suits. They had a bell on their chest, and in the corner they had a bell, and they would ring it to get the crowd fired up. And everybody hated the Ding Dongs. They were horrible. And you remember those old '80s body suits that the wrestlers wore with the masks?
Oh yeah.
And I distinctly remember this match where someone grabbed one of the Ding Dongs and threw them into that turnbuckle, and that bell fell off and it hit the ground. Burn! And the crowd was delighted as these Ding Dongs got murdered. So they come to mind. There was the Juicer. He's another guy that comes to mind. He was like a Beetlejuice wrestler, and he had powder in his hair. And he had space paint. He's another guy. I mean, I could go on and on. There's been every sort of stupid gimmick you could think of in wrestling. But you know, at this point, if you look at wrestling now, it's almost a race to kill yourself. Is what I mean. They hit a million. In the old days, you could beat guys with like a drop kick or a headlock, something like that, or an arm bar. Now you can do a triple Lindy off the roof of the building onto a bed of nails, and the guy will kick out. It's just ludicrous, you know. But it's different. It's a lot more athletic than it was. But yeah, in the old days, you'd see a lot more kind of big oafish guys in singlets, kind of rumbling around like at a Wrestle Maniac.
Are you ready to take the plunge into the exciting world of the Tandy color computer? Have you tried emulation and found it to be confusing and unreliable?
The hell is Bitbanger?
It's time to get yourself a real CoCo and get yourself over to RetroRewind.ca to kit it out with everything you need to enter the CoCo universe. The CoCo SDC is the fastest, easiest way to jump into the nirvana that is gaming on the Tandy color computer. A preloaded SD card is already included, so just pop it in your CoCo and away you go. Pick up your CoCo SDC at Retro Rewind and be sure to use the promo code AMIGOS10 to save 10% off the already low price. Thank you to RetroRewind.ca for sponsoring the CoCo Show.
Yeah, well, I think that's a perfect lead-in to this week's game, WrestleMania.
You know, you asked me the first time I'd actually seen wrestling. I will tell you, this is the first wrestling game I ever bought.
Oh, really?
It's one of the few CoCo games I ever legally purchased, I might add. The truth of the matter is, I've got this game out of the back of a magazine. It was you could order it, mail order it, and have it sent to you. And so I'm sure I begged my mom or dad. If you look at the date, it's 86, which is right when I had really gotten back into wrestling, and I wanted to have a wrestling game to play on my computer. And so this was the result. If you're not familiar with it, this is Wrestle Maniac, 2 words. It was authored by a fellow named Kevin Hoer. He actually did some stuff that's pretty good as a member of his publisher, which is Diacom Products. He did F-16 Assault, which is good. Galactic Fighter, Iron Forest, Lansford Mansion. His outfit, Diacom Products, himself along with David Dyes, they started this in '84, from what I can determine. I looked at Rainbow Magazine and found an article where they talked about the beginnings of Diacom Products. And these guys did some pretty interesting stuff on the CoCo boat, including the light gun games. They had an interface that allowed you to hook up a Master System phaser, and you could play light gun games on your CoCo.
Wow. Did you ever do that back in the day?
I had no idea you could even do it. I'm stunned at that. Now get this, boat, and you're gonna love the name of this. They also developed and designed this thing called the Rat Graphics Design Package. Okay.
Is it Rat with 2 T's like the band?
No, it's Rat with 1 T, like the horrible rodent you want to kill. But here's get ready for this. This was a paint product for your CoCo that you could buy with an accompanying mouse.
Oh, hence the name. Okay,
I assume so. So, in fact, we got a guy here that says he still has his. L. Curtis Boyle should have known. Diacom Products, they produced a lot of stuff here, Boat. I believe it or not, I had to do a ton of research, but I made a list here of stuff. I'm going to run through it real quick because they were talking about Diacom again. But I want you to see I want to see if you can name the hilarity in some of these, okay? Listen to these titles and think to yourself, where have I heard that before, okay? So, they did a game called Caladuro Flame of Light and F-16 Assault. We mentioned those. They also did Gantlet. They did Gantlet 2. All right. They did Knockout. All right. They did Paper Route. They did Rush Attack. And they did Xenon. So you can hear all these. This company's got a lot of clones.
A lot of originality over there.
Yeah. Also, everyone's favorite Karate is involved. They've also got that one. I believe a game called Iron Forest is one of the phaser games that you can get. Like I said, I believe they had 2 phaser games. So it's kind of neat. They're a neat company. And again, Kevin Hoar, who's the fellow that did this game, was involved with the making that company. So, Wrestle Maniac, released in '86, will work on any of the CoCos of 64K of RAM. It says here there's a disc or tape version. I had the disc. It was 1 to 2 joysticks. And the price on this I looked up. This is what we paid for it back in '86, Boat. $28.95 I paid for this.
I happened to see that, and I mean, I'm always floored. I know that was just the price of CoCo games back in the day, but man.
Trust me, I'm floored too after playing this for a couple minutes. I'm like, holy smokes. So, what is Wrestle Maniac? Well, Wrestle Maniac is a wrestling game for 1 to 2 people where you take 1 or 2 wrestlers and you fight each other. It's a simple game. It is a scored game, so you do generate a score. The game itself, it features a ring that fills the majority of the screen with sort of a 3D view and an audience around it, and it's sort of like a bunting at the bottom of the screen. It sort of like simulates the ring apron, I guess, Bo.
Yeah. And I miss the days when you had a good bunting around the ring.
At the top of the screen, probably I would say we could safely say this takes up 1/3 of the screen, Boat. It's the patented ZX Special. A huge logo of the game, plus in big, huge letters, the author of the game and the year the game came out. And then under it are these tiny life bars and score. So he really made sure to put himself over with this particular logo.
He wanted the world to know that he was the man behind Wrestle Maniac.
Now, I'm going to ask you, Boat, right out of the gate, what did you think of this when you just first fired it up?
I wish I could tell you that I was shocked that this was the wrestling game on the CoCo. But this was pretty much exactly what I expected.
What a burial. You know,
I didn't expect it to be quite as bad as it was. And I'll tell you, and it really has nothing to do with the graphics and the gameplay. It has to do with other factors. I will say that I had a hard time getting this to run.
Yes.
If you, I imagine most of the people listening to this show are familiar with the CoCo game archive, the CoCo software archive, which is where if I don't have a game on my SDC CoCo card already, I'll pull it off there. That version of the game just didn't work. It didn't work for me. And so we relied yet again on the ever-present L. Curtis Boyle, who searched through his old discs and found a different version of the game that did run for us. This was a cracked version that actually ran on all 3 of the CoCos, 1, 2, and 3. They had separate editions for each one.
I'm going to give Chris credit on finding this because, I mean, I knew about this game well before this show, and I wanted to play it when I got back into the CoCo, but having a CoCo 3, I could never find a version that runs, and I talked to Chris about it before, so I don't know how long this one's been known about. Maybe no one cared but us, Boat.
Right. I think that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, thumbs up to Curtis.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you just be aware that the version for the CoCo 3 runs twice as fast. However, that will not improve your experience with this game. I had the best experience with the CoCo 2 version, and because the game ran at what I presume to be the correct speed, as it matched the speed that was on the playthrough from High Retro Game Lord. So anyway, you fire this thing up. There is no character selection. It's you and the other guy. You can choose whether you want to play teams. There is a tag team mode in this game. I didn't bother with the tag team mode. I played the single match. There is, and you can choose. I think you can choose demo mode, where you can just watch the guys go at it.
Yes.
Yeah. But other than that, you just get right into the match. What you have is you have two identical wrestlers wearing slightly different attire. They're hunched over as if they're part of the earlier species of human, the kind that did not quite walk upright.
Caveman Olympics.
Yeah, and they slowly sort of meander about the ring with little regard to each other, unless one should happen to be in the vicinity of the other one, in which case, if you press the button, it will almost certainly do a move that you do not want to do. This is a game where it's the old one-button special, and we've come across this on wrestling games before. We played a game on the ZX Spectrum called Rock and Wrestle, which employed a similar kind of control scheme where you are either pressing a direction in the button or button first, then direction to do moves. On paper, that seems great because you're like, man, look at all these different moves I can do. But in practice, it's difficult, and there's a couple reasons why. One is that it's sort of the curse of any game in which you move about a 3D plane. This is a game that you can actually move pretty much anywhere you want in the ring in terms of you have both axes of movement available to you. But it makes it difficult to kind of line yourself up with the other wrestler. There's not a whole lot of feedback telling you that you are in line with the other guy. And the other wrestler doesn't do you any favors, because here's the thing about both these wrestlers. If you ever watch real wrestling, there's not a whole lot of circling that goes on. Pretty much if you watch a wrestling match, the two fighters approach each other and they immediately start to grapple. You know, that's the thing. They got to lock up. That's what you call it, right?
Yeah, you got it, man.
Yeah,
you
lock up.
That's right.
Okay. And that's sort of the saving grace of a lot of good wrestling video games, is because the lockup gives you physical confirmation that yes, you are lined up with the other wrestler and you can attempt to move now. You don't get the lockup in Wrestle Maniac. What you do get is the old awkward like punch or kick that may line up with the guy or it may not. That is sort of my initial 5 minutes with the game was that much.
Well, first of all, let's back up for 1 second. Okay, so I had this back in the day on my CoCo 2 at the time. Yes, there is a speed difference if you play this in the CoCo 3, and it makes a difference in the way the game plays. This game,
do you think it plays better, faster?
No, it's virtually unplayable at faster speeds. Right. So listen, let's snap back for a minute here. Okay, it's 1986. Okay, wrestling games were not far along. Okay, and so what Kevin attempted here, it was noble to a certain degree, and he came close. He came close to getting this, and Boat did sort of nail it there when he said that there's no grappling in this per se. In most games, when you get close enough to each other, you'll either grab the guy and get into a lock, or you'll grab him and lock him from behind, so you can do stuff like a belly to back suplex or whatnot. In this game, there's no grappling. You literally just walk around. And the game does have several moves, but the majority of the moves aren't available to you initially, because you have a life bar in this, and sort of like a stun bar, I guess would be the best way to put it.
It's a two-phase life bar.
Yeah,
you have
right.
Like sort of your normal life, and then you can get worn down into which you reach the stunned zone.
Right, that's what I mean.
Which is like a red bar at the bottom of the
That's right. That's a different colored bar, because you'll use up all your normal bar. And so when you're in this zone, your guy is basically stands there looking like a doofus. And that's when you can employ the majority of the neater maneuvers in this, your pile drivers and such. When you're just running around like Goose, if you're kicking, you look sort of like a hunchback rocket, and your punches aren't great either. You can also grab the guy and Irish whip him, which means take him and throw him into the ropes. He kind of bounces back, and you can sort of clothesline him, but it really doesn't fall down or anything. Nothing.
Yeah, well, you're limited with the clothesline animation because of the angle that you see the wrestlers.
Yeah.
If their arm is extended straight out beside them, it doesn't look like anything.
Yeah.
And so when you come off the ropes, you're able to do this incredible flying leap in which you can leap literally in the physics of the game. You're leaping about 8 or 9 feet up into the air to no discernible effect.
Yeah. I could do that in real life. Now, as you wear the guy down, you get him where he's stunned. Then you can start breaking out the cool stuff. Right. There's a body slam. There's a back breaker. And there's the world's wackiest pile driver. And I used to play this with my buddy Hose. And we loved using the pile driver because the real pile driver, you pick the guy up around the waist, you pick him up where his feet are over his head, and you crash down on top of his head. You sit down and his head crashes in the canvas. In Wrestle Maniac, you physically grab the opponent, you spin him completely around, and then you lightly touch his forehead to the mat a couple times. It's the goofiest move you ever saw. The first time we did it, in fact, we still mention it to this day, because it's just so silly. But it is in there. And the fact that this game has sort of some more advanced, maneuvers, it's kind of cool. Backbreaker looks pretty good. The tag mode is literally just going to the corner, hitting the button, and another exact duplicate of your guy will come in with another life bar. That's the only difference. So you can play tag mode. I mean, it's nice that it's in there. The game does have a top rope maneuver. You can use it anytime you want. The guy going to the top rope is slower than I am. It's unbelievably slow. So by the time he gets anywhere near the top rope, you could be in a car or at the concession stand or any place. It takes forever. Now, if you're stunned, really stunned, you may have enough time to get up there. But what normally happens is you come off that thing and you don't hit anything. And that's the quickest way to wear yourself down is by coming off the top rope, because that's what wears you down. The computer is irritating to fight because basically this game comes down to a chasing match. You chase the computer all over the place and kick and punch and try to do more damage than he's doing until you stun him. That's the game. I mean, that's literally 9/10. It's more than that. It's like 90, 100ths of the game is that. And then you can do your special moves. There's a count. You have a ref's count, but you don't have a ref. You just have literally a category at the top of the screen called count, where you see the 1, 2, 3. As far as I can tell, it's impossible to be pinned in one-player mode. Don't think it's ever happened. So you just keep wrestling forever until you pin the opponent. This is a game that was much more enjoyable with 2 players. I will say that. Me and my buddy Hose. Now, granted, we had nothing else to do. Okay, this is one of those situations where it's like, wow, that's all you got.
And you also made a good point that 86 is very early on in terms of wrestling games, and I guarantee you that Kevin Hoare wasn't checking out the latest from Japan when he was writing this up.
The gameplay elements of it are going to be real basic.
In fact, I don't know if what else was going on in the world of computers at all in terms of wrestling games.
What year did the NES wrestling, the very famous pro wrestling, come out on the NES? Do you remember?
I'm gonna have to let me look that up real quick while you keep talking.
If you consider that now, granted, there's a wide gap between that game and this one. But I mean,
okay. So like I said, it's probable that Kevin was not up because this came out in 86 in Japan.
Yeah.
And then it came out I think late in 87 in the US.
Right. So this predates
it hadn't been released yet. So there was really I don't know what was going on the C64. That would be the only thing that I would be curious about. What kind of hot wrestling action was available on the C64 to compare this with? Yeah. Because, like you say, the graphics, aside from the fact that your guys stoop all the time, which I think looks dumb, I wish that he would have just drawn the sprites upright.
Yeah.
The graphics look great. I mean, great in terms of the CoCo.
Yeah.
And the sprites are big. And the moves look cool. When you do pull off the moves, they look cool. The pile driver looks goofy. You're right. But I mean, like, you get a thrill even when the computer is doing something to you. You sort of get a thrill out of it.
I will tell you that when I got this in the mail, and keep in mind that my folks paid $30 for this, I'm sure plus shipping. I was underwhelmed, even in 86. And I got this the second it came out. I had them buy it for me. I was like, I don't ask for much. I want this. And so even back then, I wasn't like, but I mean, we did derive fun from it. in 2-player mode. I never ever played this by myself though. So there you go.
And
now,
I'm sure and I totally get that. I totally get that with a 2-player, playing this with a buddy is going to be where the fun is at. But this game, it's inexcusable to me that you can play this game forever. Like, I played this game a lot, more than I care to admit, because it's a game that once you start playing it, because you can't be pinned, you sort of lose track of time. And before you know it, you've spent 20 or 30 minutes just kind of blindly kicking and punching around the ring, trying to make something happen. The problem is that in this game, your life meter is constantly refilling.
Yes, that's
In an effort to wear your opponent down to where you can A, do a cool move, or B, pin your opponent to win the game, unless you have just sort of superhuman abilities, I was never able to get my opponent worn down enough to where the stun meter would last long enough. Because what would happen is I'd get him worn down enough to where it would be in the stun meter, but then he'd run away, and by the time I caught back up to him, he'd be beyond that
right.
again.
If you play the CoCo 3 version of this, you're screwed. You can never get there. On the slower versions, you can get there because it's easier to actually get him and kick him. But it does refill too quickly. There's no doubt about that. This is just one, listen, you're not going to want to play this today. Let's face facts. Even with 2 players, it might be sort of fun for a few minutes. But, this is a game of its era, and it didn't age well. And it wasn't that great to begin with. I'll give the guy credit for giving it a shot, Boat. But I would call this one El Stinko Grande. And keep in mind that I own the darn thing. I should mention that it came in a plastic bag with a photocopied booklet, folded, basically a piece of paper folded in half that had all the instructions.
That was the CoCo way.
In fact, it looked like it would. And the funny thing is, with the exception of the art on the front, it looked like the entire booklet had been hand typed and then photocopied. So I don't think this went to a print setter. They weren't doing jack. This was literally typed in by somebody that Dicom, and then they Xeroxed it. So this is one of those games.
I often wonder, because, obviously the CoCo scene, infinitesimal compared to the ZX Spectrum. But if you were putting out software, say through mail order, and you were charging $30 for a game, you don't need to sell that many copies compared to somebody trying to hawk a budget, £1.99 title out of a news agent at the ZX Spectrum, where the publisher's taking a cut and all that stuff.
Right.
So I wonder at the end of the day, if these CoCo developers, Tom Mix and this outfit, if at the end of the day they weren't pulling in more cash just by virtue of fleecing their customers, charging $30 per game.
Well, I can't speak to their other releases. I know Gauntlet 2, F-16. Those were big titles for the CoCo. I can't imagine this is a big title, and and I can't imagine they moved too many units like this. And also the game coming out in '86, because that's when you were starting to get a lot more options than you would have had, say, a couple years before that. But I mean, you might be right. I can tell you that it seems like you would have even back in those days, the CoCo audience was smaller than this. I would think than the Spectrum audience, but I could be wrong. It's hard to. It's almost apples to oranges compared to 2 different countries' computers. In terms of.
It's just kind of a fun thing to think about, whether the economies of scale kicked in that way or not. So.
Yeah.
All right, Aaron. Well, that's going to do it for Wrestle Maniac.
No reviews on this one, Boat?
Well, it's stunning that Curtis said that he did it. He put a little review up saying that he was busy with work, but this is one that he enjoyed in 2-player mode, which is the way to do it.
This will be played at Boat Fest, I guarantee it. I'm going to have that.
On
this
the
is
big
be on,
screen.
Yeah, on the big
on the main
screen.
stage.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
But we do appreciate everybody who supports the CoCo show, this fine endeavor. Of course, we've got the people that watch us live on twitch.tv/Amigos Retro Gaming. We record this show on there. If you can become notified by clicking the bell whenever we go live. You can we record the show about once a month. Of course, we are getting ever closer to our goal, Aaron, of making the CoCo Show a weekly program.
Oh, man.
Once we reach that $200 a month in Patreon supporters, we want to thank our CoCo Show game selection committee members, Robert Murphy and Steve Rasmussen. They're really the superstars. They help select this fine piece of software. And of course, we want to thank all of our CoCo Show supporters on Patreon: Graham Vebke, Edvin Helland, Steve Rasmussen, Buttons, and William Becker. And that's going to do it, Aaron. Patreon.com/The CoCo Show if you want to kick in a couple bucks a month to keep this show rolling. Next month, we are going to be playing, Aaron, Draconian.
Now that one I know. Good game. I'm anxious to give that one a whirl, Boat.
Yeah, so we hope you will join us next time. And until then, all hail
L. Curtis Boyle.